Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting right into the thick of conservation science. We're focusing on one key piece of research that really maps out the fight against some of the world's toughest invaders. Our goal here is to break down this important paper for you, so you really grasp the scale of the problem and maybe some of the unexpected twists in trying to solve it.
Right. The paper we're looking at is Mammal Invaders on Islands, Impact, Control, and Control Impact. It's by Courchamp, Jean-Louis Chapuis, and Pascal. And it's not just a list of, which animals cause problems. It's a deep review of the ecological damage these mammals do on islands, the sometimes pretty intense methods used to control them, and maybe most importantly, the long-term, often surprising effects of stepping in like that.
And the stakes here are incredibly high, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about biological invasions being the #2 cause of biodiversity loss globally. Only habitat destruction beats it. So species moving around is causing massive extinction events.
Exactly. And that impact is, well, it's massively concentrated on islands. Islands are just fundamentally fragile places. You have communities that haven't diversified much, evolutionarily speaking. Their food webs are simpler, and they have extremely high rates of endemism.
Endemism meaning the species there live only there, nowhere else on Earth.
Precisely. And because they evolved in isolation, often without major land predators or competitors, well, they're ecologically naive.
So they don't have the defenses, like running away or having spines.
Often, yeah. They might lack basic fear responses, reproduce slowly, or lack physical defenses, and the result is just stark. Since the 17th century, 93% of all bird extinctions and 81% of mammal extinctions worldwide happened on islands.
Wow, 93% for birds.
Yeah.
Concentrations.
Yeah.
It's devastating. Now, normally in ecology, people talk about the TENS rule, right? Like only 10% of species introduced actually establish, and only 10% of those become pests.
Yeah, that's the general idea. But introduced mammals on islands, they completely break that rule. They're exceptionally good at setting up shop. Look at New Zealand. They had 55 mammal species introduced over time, and 32 of them established populations. That's way over half.
So much higher than the 10% rule would suggest.
Much higher. Which leads to the next question. Once they're there, who are the main players causing all this ecological damage?
Okay, let's unpack the rogues gallery then. Who are the real heavy hitters in this crisis?
It's actually a fairly small group that's responsible for the lion's share of the damage. We're talking rats, the black, brown, and Pacific species, feral cats, goats, rabbits, pigs, and mice. And the paper uses some strong language. Cats are called universally damaging. Goats, the most destructive feral mammal. And rats have caused, quote, catastrophe for island birds.
And it's not just simple predation or eating plants, is it? The ways they cause harm are diverse. Let's maybe start with the herbivores.
Rabbits are a classic, tragic example. They land on an island, find tons of food, no natural enemies, so their populations just explode. These huge boom and bust cycles completely strip the vegetation. On Laysan Island in Hawaii, rabbits wiped out 26 plant species in about 20 years.
20 years.
And losing that vegetation directly led to the extinction of 3 native bird species. Plus, they cause erosion, compete for burrows needed by seabirds. It's a whole cascade.
Okay, so herbivores devastate the plant base. Then you have the omnivores, like rats, which seem to be everywhere.
Oh, rats are a global menace on islands. They're linked to something like 54% of all extinctions caused by introduced predators. The black rat, Rattus rattus, is particularly bad because it climbs trees. It's arboreal, so it gets into the forest canopy, threatening birds that might otherwise be safe from ground predators.
And they can act fast.
Incredibly fast. Big South Cape Island, New Zealand black rats arrive, and in less than 2 years, they caused the local wipeout of 3 endemic birds and the total extinction of 2 other bird species and a bat species. Gone.
Less than 2 years. And then the specialist predators, like cats, often introduced deliberately, right?
Yeah, often brought in ironically to control the rats. But cats are super adaptable predators. They quickly switch to whatever native prey is easiest to catch, often those naive birds or reptiles. The Macquarie Island story is, well, infamous. 5 cats were introduced. They bred up to a population of about 2,000.
2,000 cats.
And that population was estimated to be killing 500,000 burrowing petrels every single year.
500,000. That Macquarie example is awful, but it also hints at something deeper, doesn't it? That these problems aren't always straightforward. The paper really emphasizes these complex interactions where things get weird and unpredictable.
Exactly. We have to think beyond just cat eats bird or goat eats plant. Often, one introduced species changes the environment in a way that helps another introduced species become even more destructive. It creates these unstable, complicated food webs.
The first concept here sounds pretty scary. scary. Hyperpredation.
Yeah, hyperpredation is a nasty feedback loop. It happens when you have an introduced prey animal, let's say rabbits again, that becomes super abundant. This huge rabbit population then supports a much larger population of an introduced predator, say cats, than the native ecosystem could ever sustain on its own.
So the rabbits are like fuel for the cat population.
Exactly. They subsidize the cats, the cat numbers swell thanks to the rabbits. Then, this artificially large cat population turns its attention to the native species, maybe petrels or parakeets, that couldn't possibly support that many cats alone, and they can just wipe them out. The rabbits indirectly cause the extinction of the native birds via the cats. That's precisely the dynamic they saw on Macquarie Island.
Okay, so if you see that, your instinct is get rid of the cats. They're the predators doing the killing.
Right, remove the obvious villain. But that can lead you straight into another trap, mesopredator release.
Mesopredator, meaning middle predator.
Yeah, so imagine you successfully remove the top introduced predator, the cat. But rats, or mice the mesopredators, are also present on the island. You take away the cats, and suddenly the rats, which the cats might have been keeping partly in check, just explode. Their numbers skyrocket. And this massive new rat population can end up causing even more damage to the native species, especially eggs and chicks, than the cats were causing before.
So trying to fix one problem makes another, potentially worse problem flare up. That's a nightmare scenario for conservationists.
It absolutely is. It means you can't just target one species in isolation. You have to understand the whole messed up web they've created.
And then there's this really counterintuitive one, facilitation, where an introduced species actually helps a native predator, which then harms another native species.
It sounds bizarre, but it happened in the California Gulf Islands. Introduced pigs became established and provided a huge, reliable food source for native golden eagles. This abundance of food allowed the eagle population to establish and grow on the islands. But what did the eagles eat besides pigs? They started preying heavily on the endemic island fox.
Wow. So the pigs basically enabled the eagles to become a major threat to the foxes, turning a native predator against a native prey.
Exactly. The pigs facilitated the eagles' impact. It just shows how unpredictable these chains of events can be.
This sheer complexity really underscores why management is so critical. Let's shift gears to the control strategies. The paper makes a strong case for eradication, doesn't it? Complete removal, not just trying to reduce numbers.
Definitely. On islands, especially smaller or medium-sized ones, eradication is usually the ultimate goal. Mitigation, just constantly trying to suppress the population, means endless effort and cost. Eradication is tough, it's expensive up front, and getting those very last few individuals is incredibly difficult. But if you achieve it, it's permanent. Over the long run, it's far more cost-effective and ecologically sound.
So how do they actually do it? Let's talk about the traditional methods. First, physical and chemical.
Sure. For larger mammals like goats or pigs, shooting is often effective. Sometimes helicopters are used. There's also a clever technique called the Judas goat method. You capture one animal, fit it with a radio collar that's your Judas, and release it.
Because it will naturally seek out others of its kind.
Exactly. Its social instincts lead it straight to any remaining hidden groups, which allows hunters to find and remove those last hard-to-locate individuals. Very effective for social animals. Trapping is also used, especially for smaller mammals, but it's very labor-intensive and rarely achieves full eradication by itself. Fencing can be used for exclusion, too, like keeping cattle out of sensitive areas on Amsterdam Island.
Okay, and then for the really widespread problems like rats and mice, it often comes down to chemical methods, right? Poisoning.
Yes, poisoning is still the main tool for widespread rodent control. The most common are anticoagulants, like brodifacoum, which cause internal bleeding. Another toxin used is 1080, sodium monofluoroacetate. These are usually delivered in bait stations spread across the island. A major challenge, though, is secondary poisoning,
Where something eats the poisoned rat and gets poisoned itself, like a native hawk or scavenger.
Precisely. That's a huge concern. Managing that risk is critical. Sometimes it involves incredibly intensive work, like temporarily capturing every individual of a highly endangered native species, like the tuatara in New Zealand or the Seychelles magpie robin, keeping them safe in captivity while the poison is active, and then releasing them back once the island is clear.
That sounds like a monumental undertaking. Logistically and financially huge.
It absolutely is. These campaigns require immense planning and resources.
Okay, beyond physical and chemical methods, what about biological control? We know that has a tricky history. The classic example being mongooses introduced to control rats, which then ate everything but the rats.
Yeah, the history is littered with failures because of a lack of specificity. The introduced predator or disease often impacts non-target native species much more than the intended alien target. But modern research is exploring more sophisticated, targeted approaches. The big one discussed is virus-vectored immunocontraception, or VVIC.
Immunocontraception.
Yeah.
So making the animals infertile instead of killing them.
That's the idea. It involves genetically engineering a virus, one that's specific to the target species, like rabbits or mice, to carry the instructions for making proteins that trigger the animal's own immune system to attack its reproductive cells. Basically, it sterilizes them.
And it's vectored by a virus, meaning it could spread through the population.
Potentially, yes. That's part of the appeal. It could be self-disseminating and therefore very cost-effective for large areas. It's also often framed as more ethical than widespread poisoning.
But releasing a genetically engineered self-spreading virus sounds like it carries enormous risks, too.
Absolutely huge risks. Irreversibility is a major one once it's out. Can you ever recall it? And public acceptance of releasing GMOs, especially viruses, into the environment is understandably very low. The authors stress this kind of technology should only ever be considered for very remote, uninhabited islands where containment is essentially guaranteed, and even then, with extreme caution.
Okay, so whether it's shooting, poison, or future tech like VVIC, the goal is often removal. But the paper is really clear. Getting rid of the invader isn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot.
That's perhaps the most crucial takeaway. Post-control monitoring is essential. Just removing the alien species doesn't mean the ecosystem magically snaps back to how it was before.
Because that's when these ecological surprise effects can really kick in. You mentioned the Sisyphus effect earlier.
Right, the Sisyphus effect, named after the Greek myth, of course. This is where you remove an invasive herbivore, say, goats that were eating everything. You succeed, the goats are gone. But it turns out the goats were also eating an invasive plant, maybe a really aggressive vine, keeping it somewhat in check. Remove the goats, and suddenly this invasive vine is released from grazing pressure. On Sargon Island, after they removed goats and pigs, an introduced vine called Operculina ventricosa just exploded. It formed these dense mats, smothering the native vegetation that everyone hoped would recover.
So you solve one problem only to unleash another, potentially worse one that was being suppressed by the first invader. Like Sisyphus pushing the boulder uphill, only for it to roll back down.
Exactly. The original invaders were inadvertently performing a kind of weeding service for an even worse invader.
And these unexpected ripples go down the food chain too, right? Affecting things like insects.
Oh, definitely. On Bird Island in the Seychelles, they successfully eradicated rats. Great news for the birds. But then the population of an exotic ant species, the crazy ant Anopolepis longripes, exploded. These ants then started becoming a major threat to nesting sooty terns and endemic skinks. Removing the rats changed the invertebrate dynamics in a totally unforeseen way.
So what does this all mean for actually doing conservation? If we want these eradication programs to lead to real long-term recovery, what's needed?
Well, the paper stresses several key things. First, you need solid, sustained financial and political backing. These are long, expensive projects. Second, you need incredibly careful pre-eradication assessment. Understanding those complex food webs, predicting potential surprises like mesopredator release or the Sisyphus effect, that can take years. Sometimes up to 10 years of study before you even start the removal.
10 years of prep work.
Sometimes, yes, for complex islands. And third, you absolutely need rigorous long-term monitoring after the eradication. And that monitoring has to follow what's called a BACI design.
BACI, what's that stand for?
Before-after control impact. It means you measure key ecological variables before you intervene and after you intervene, both on the island where you did the work, the impact site, and on a similar nearby island where you didn't intervene, the control site.
Okay, so comparing the before and after on both islands lets you separate the changes caused by your eradication from just natural environmental fluctuations that might have happened anyway.
Precisely. It's the scientifically rigorous way to know if your actions actually caused the observed effects, good or bad.
It really drives home that we can't just think of this as pest control. It's a complex, long-term ecological restoration. And the authors suggest thinking even bigger.
They do. They advocate viewing every single alien control program, especially eradications, as a large-scale scientific experiment. When we pull a major species, even an alien one, out of an ecosystem, we're fundamentally altering the trophic web. Every project, whether it goes perfectly or throws up surprises like the Sisyphus effect, is a chance to learn more about fundamental ecology, about how these systems work, and how to better manage them globally.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. We've heard that fully understanding the risks, the potential for these complex negative interactions like hyperpredation or mesopredator release, might require up to a decade of study beforehand. But many island species are facing imminent extinction right now. So is waiting those 10 years for the perfect plan always feasible, always the right call? Or is there sometimes a case for taking immediate decisive action, even if it carries the risk of unforeseen ecological consequences? It's that tension, isn't it? Between the urgent need to act and the very real danger of triggering an unexpected ecological catastrophe? Something to think about.